Water cannons, paintballs, rubber bullets and rubber ducks. They're just some of the weapons being used on the streets of Bangkok in one of the biggest protest movements in Thailand's history. Tens of thousands took to the streets this week. On Wednesday, they marched on the police national headquarters, a day after clashes in which 6 people were shot and dozens of others were injured. The unrest began in July. Protest leaders are demanding reforms to the monarchy and the constitution, as well as the removal of the Prime Minister, who first took power in a 2014 coup. Things seem to be heating up, and protest groups have promised to ramp up the scale of their demonstrations and their pressure on authorities. I spoke earlier with the Wall Street Journal's Southeast Asia correspondent, Feliz about where all this could be heading. Now, this protest movement began quite a while ago, but things really have ramped up this week. It looks to be getting quite tense in Bangkok, perhaps dangerously so.
That's correct. The protests really started gathering momentum in February of this year with the dissolution of a new popular opposition party. After coronavirus lockdowns took effect, they sort of cooled down for a few months and reignited this summer. And since then, they've been steadily gaining momentum. This week marked a pretty serious escalation as the police sort of ramped up their use of force to disperse the protesters on Tuesday night. That was at a protest in relation to a parliamentary vote on potential changes to the constitution.
The monarchy is usually treated with incredible reverence in Thailand. How did we get to such a state where vast numbers of the population are denouncing it?
That's exactly right. The monarchy has long been held as a sort of sacred institution in Thailand. And the country also has very strict lèse, majesté laws that carry penalties of up to 15 years in prison for perceived insults to the royal family. So it's always been something that if people held views that were negative of the monarchy, they tended to keep them to themselves. There's a new king that succeeded a very popular king after his death in 2016. The previous king, Bhumibol Adulyadej, was a much-loved figure. He was known for traveling throughout the countryside and carrying out a lot of public works that benefited the rural poor and things like that. His son, King Vajiralongkorn, spends most of his time in Germany. That has drawn a lot of criticism because many Thais are wondering why their tax dollars may be funding the king's stays abroad, and that has been a subject of much controversy in recent months.
Feliz, how specific are the protesters' demands, and what's the likelihood of their demands actually being met?
Their demands are very specific and they're very consistent. They're calling for 3 things. One is that Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha step down. The second is that the Constitution, which was written by a military junta after a 2014 coup, be completely rewritten. And the third are reforms that would curb the influence of the monarchy. All of these are pretty big asks in Thailand, particularly the third. Reforming the role of the monarchy has proven to be pretty much a non-starter among the political establishment. This is seen as sort of the third rail of Thai politics that you can't really criticize or alter. Nonetheless, the protesters are very adamant in their demand that the relationship between the palace and the government change.
Yes, and Thailand has, of course, had a recent history of political turmoil with coups in 2006 and 2014. How does this episode compare? Is there concern that things could get similarly messy?
Thailand does have a history of political turmoil, and about every 10 years there seem to be large bouts of street protests. Sometimes they have been violently suppressed. There are also a lot of coups in Thailand. There have been more than a dozen since the end of absolute monarchy in the 1930s. And this is sort of a recurrent theme, as well as the rewriting of the constitution. Thailand has had 20 constitutions. The current protests are a little bit different in nature to those of the past. Before, they were usually led by one of 2 main political camps. One was a populist movement that largely represented the rural poor, and another that was more establishment-based and was supported largely by urban elites. In the current protest movement, It seems to be led mostly by young people, many of them mobilized online. They don't seem to be aligned or influenced by either of these previously very influential political camps. It's sort of a grassroots movement. It's youth-powered, student-led, and does feel much different in nature than those of the past. In terms of whether this could escalate into something more intense or violent, many analysts do believe that that could be the case. It's unclear how much more tolerance the government will have as these protests continue to grow.